My name is Bridget, and at 27, I never expected to be fighting my own parents for the $10 million estate my grandparents left me. They raised me when my parents abandoned me at age 7, giving me everything they never did: love, stability, and values. When my grandfather passed 6 months after my graduation, I honored his wishes by securing the inheritance in a trust. Last week, my parents and sister showed up at my door with suspicious smiles, awakening all my childhood fears. If you've ever had to protect what's rightfully yours from the people who should have protected you, let me know in the comments and subscribe to hear how I handled what came next. I was just 4 years old when the instability started. My earliest memories aren't of bedtime stories or playground adventures, but of my parents' erratic behavior. The strange smell that I later realized was alcohol mixed with something worse, and the constant stream of unfamiliar faces passing through our small apartment. My father Jackson worked sporadically as a construction worker, but spent more time between jobs than actually working. My mother Diana claimed to be an aspiring actress, but her auditions seemed to happen at odd hours and always left her either manic with false hope or crashing into days-long depressions. My sister Alicia was 3 years older than me. She became my protector, making sure I had something to eat when our parents forgot to buy groceries and holding my hand during the shouting matches that frequently erupted. She taught me to recognize when our parents were having a bad day, her code for when they were using substances, and we would hide in our shared bedroom closet, playing silent games with paper dolls she made from old magazines. When I was 7, a day came that started like many others. Our parents were arguing about money again. Dad had lost another job, and Mom was screaming that someone named Tony was threatening her about money they owed. I remember how suddenly everything went quiet. My parents stopped fighting, and my mother called us into the living room with a cheerfulness that felt wrong. "We're going on an adventure," she announced, her smile too wide. "You're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a little while." We'd only met my father's parents a handful of times. They lived in a beautiful house an hour away, and visits were always tense affairs, with hushed arguments between my father and grandfather. I later learned they disapproved of his lifestyle and choices, especially his decision to marry my mother. My parents packed a small bag for each of us, promising they would come back in a week once they sorted some things out. I believed them. Alicia didn't. I can still see her face as we sat in my grandparents' pristine living room, her eyes hard and knowing beyond her 10 years. My grandfather Harold was tall and serious, a self-made businessman who built a successful chain of specialty hardware stores. My grandmother Margaret was elegant but warm, with a talent for making everything around her beautiful. They welcomed us with prepared guest rooms and new pajamas in exactly our sizes. Looking back, I think they had been expecting this day for years. A week passed, then 2. My grandparents called my parents, but the numbers were disconnected. Eventually, a social worker came to talk to us. I learned my parents had left the state destination unknown. My grandparents immediately filed for temporary guardianship. Alicia surprised everyone by refusing to stay. "I'm going to live with Jessica," she announced, referring to her best friend. Jessica's parents had apparently agreed to take her in. I was devastated by this second abandonment, but later understood she couldn't bear another family environment after what we'd experienced. She needed complete separation. My grandparents became my legal guardians after months of court proceedings. They never spoke ill of my parents in front of me, but I overheard enough to understand my father had serious debts and possibly legal troubles. Every few months, we'd receive a phone call or postcard from my parents with vague promises about coming back for me once they were settled. The calls became less frequent, the promises more hollow. Meanwhile, my grandparents created the stable home I'd never known. Grandmother taught me to bake and garden. Grandfather helped me with math homework and took me fishing on Sunday mornings. They attended every school event, cheered my achievements, and comforted my disappointments. They never tried to replace my parents, but filled the void with something perhaps more valuable: unconditional love, paired with consistent boundaries. They were wealthy, but lived modestly, believing that money was a tool for security and helping others, not for show. Wealth that's displayed is wealth diminished, grandfather often said. They taught me the value of education, hard work, and financial responsibility. Every birthday and Christmas, they put money into an education fund for me, explaining how compound interest worked and why planning for the future mattered. By my teenage years, the occasional calls from my parents felt like intrusions rather than connections. My sister Alicia would sometimes reach out, but she had built her own life and seemed determined to distance herself from our shared past. I understood, but missed the closeness we'd once had. My grandparents became my true family, the foundation of my understanding of love and trust. But they also, inadvertently, taught me caution. I learned early that the people who should protect you sometimes don't, and that security requires vigilance. These were lessons I couldn't have imagined would become so crucial later. By the time I turned 15, life with my grandparents had become a comfortable routine. We lived in their beautiful colonial home in Connecticut, where my grandmother tended her prized rose garden, and my grandfather spent evenings in his study reviewing business reports. Their home became my sanctuary, a place where I finally felt safe enough to flourish. My grandparents never flaunted their wealth. Their $10 million estate was the result of my grandfather's business acumen and decades of smart investments. Grandfather had built his hardware store chain from a single location into a regional powerhouse before selling to a national corporation just before I came to live with them. They lived well, but sensibly, investing in quality rather than extravagance. Money is freedom, Bridget grandfather would say. Not to buy things, but to make choices based on what's right, not what's necessary. This philosophy shaped my own relationship with finances. I worked summer jobs, not because I needed to, but because grandfather believed everyone should experience earning their own way. School became my refuge and passion. Without the chaos of my early years, my natural intelligence flourished. I joined the debate team, played violin in the orchestra, and maintained straight A's. My grandparents attended every competition and concert, their proud faces a constant source of motivation. During those years, contact with my biological parents dwindled to almost nothing. Occasionally around Christmas or my birthday, a card would arrive with a generic message and no return address. My sister Alicia graduated high school and immediately moved across the country for college, making it clear she wanted to start fresh with no connections to our past. When college application season arrived, my grandparents encouraged me to aim high. With their support, I applied to several prestigious universities, eventually accepting an offer from an Ivy League school to study finance with a minor in legal studies. The day my acceptance letter arrived, grandmother made my favorite dinner, and grandfather opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving. "For moments that matter," he said, pouring me a small glass despite being underage. I threw myself into college life, joining investment clubs and securing competitive internships during summers. My analytical mind thrived in the world of finance, and professors often commented on my unusual maturity and practical knowledge. Few knew this came from years of listening to my grandfather discuss investment strategies and market trends over breakfast. During my sophomore year, the first shadow fell over my carefully constructed world. Grandmother, always energetic despite her 70 years, began experiencing unusual fatigue. Tests revealed an aggressive form of cancer that had already spread. The prognosis was poor. I wanted to take a semester off to help care for her, but both my grandparents refused. Your education is non-negotiable, grandmother insisted during one of our video calls. I need to know you're building your future while I'm fighting this battle. I compromised by coming home every weekend. The 3-hour bus ride each way gave me time to study while still being present for her increasingly difficult treatments. Watching my strong, elegant grandmother diminish was heartbreaking. But she faced her illness with the same grace she brought to everything. Life doesn't always give us what we want, she told me during one of our last conversations. But it always gives us chances to show who we are. She made me promise to complete my degree and to always protect myself while keeping my heart open. Grandmother passed away during the spring semester of my senior year. Grandfather, who had been married to her for 49 years, seemed to age a decade overnight. I spent that summer at home with him helping organize her affairs and providing company during those first terrible months of his grief. Despite his personal loss, Grandfather insisted I return to school for my final year. Margaret would haunt me if I let your education suffer, he said with a sad smile. We set up weekly video calls, and I came home monthly. During these visits, I noticed his own health beginning to decline. The doctor called it stress cardiomyopathy, a heart weakened by grief. But I knew it was simpler than that. He was dying of a broken heart. Throughout all this upheaval, my parents remained conspicuously absent. Not even a condolence card arrived after grandmother's passing. My sister Alicia sent flowers, but couldn't attend the funeral due to work commitments. The contrast between my grandparents' dedication and my parents' absence only strengthened my bond with the two people who had actually raised me. I graduated with honors in finance and a job offer from a prestigious investment firm. Grandfather attended my graduation ceremony, despite his weakening health beaming with pride as I crossed the stage. Your grandmother would be so proud, he whispered when I found him afterward. You were the daughter of our hearts. 2 weeks after my graduation, we had a serious conversation about the future. Sitting in his study, surrounded by family photos and business mementos, Grandfather broached the subject of his estate. I've made provisions for you, Bridget, he said, his voice steady, despite his frailty. Margaret and I always intended for everything to pass to you. You're our granddaughter in every way that matters. He then shared something that sent a chill through me. Your father has contacted me twice in the past month asking for money. Significant amounts. When I refused, he made veiled references to his rights as my son. Grandfather's expression hardened. I want you to be prepared. When I'm gone, they may come back. I didn't want to think about it, then believing his concern was exaggerated. I couldn't imagine my absent parents suddenly reappearing after nearly 2 decades. But Grandfather, as in most things, proved wiser than I was ready to acknowledge. Grandfather's health deteriorated rapidly in the months following my graduation. What began as fatigue and occasional shortness of breath progressed to congestive heart failure that required hospitalization. I deferred my job start date, moving back into my childhood bedroom to care for him. Our roles reversed in those final months. I managed his medications, coordinated with home health nurses, and sat with him during long afternoons, while he drifted between sharp lucidity and gentle confusion. During his clear moments, he continued my financial education now with a new urgency. People show their true nature when money is involved. He told me one evening as I helped him review some documents. Even family, perhaps especially family. He insisted on introducing me to his longtime attorney, Patrick Sullivan, who began including me in discussions about the estate. I learned that my grandparents had amassed considerable wealth beyond the family home and investment accounts I knew about. The total estate approached $10 million. Your grandmother and I built this for you, Bridget, Grandfather said, when he saw my shock at the figures. We always knew you would use it wisely. One rainy Tuesday, 6 months after my graduation, I found grandfather unresponsive during his afternoon nap. The paramedics arrived quickly, but could only confirm what I already knew. He had passed peacefully in his sleep, joining grandmother after just 14 months apart. The funeral was small, but dignified exactly as he would have wanted. My sister Alicia attended this time, standing awkwardly in a black dress she clearly had bought for the occasion. My parents did not appear. Later, I learned they had called the funeral home, asking about arrangements, but never made the trip. The reading of the will took place in Patrick Sullivan's wood-paneled office downtown. I sat alone across from him, a single beneficiary where there should have been a family. The terms were straightforward. I inherited everything. The house, the investment accounts, the insurance policies, even grandfather's collection of rare coins and grandmother's jewelry. Patrick handed me a letter after reviewing the documents. Harold asked me to give you this privately, he explained, leaving me alone to read it. My dearest Bridget, if you're reading this, I've joined Margaret, which brings me peace, even as I regret leaving you. You have been the greatest joy of our later years, and we couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. The inheritance you've received comes with responsibility. You have the intelligence to manage it, and the heart to use it well. But I must also warn you, your parents have significant debts and a history of financial mismanagement that continues to this day. I have reason to believe they may attempt to access these funds through you. Consider consulting with Patrick about establishing a trust. It would protect you and honor our wishes for this legacy. Remember that money is only a tool. Your real inheritance is the strength and discernment we tried to nurture in you. Trust your instincts. They're excellent. All my love, grandfather. I sat in that quiet office, tears streaming down my face, feeling both enormously blessed and suddenly very alone. The responsibility of this inheritance felt overwhelming, but beneath that was a deeper concern. My grandfather's warning echoed my own unacknowledged fears about my parents' potential reappearance. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into managing the practical aspects of my new situation. I arranged for the house to be maintained while I decided whether to live there or sell it. I met with financial advisors recommended by Patrick to understand the investment portfolio. I sorted through personal belongings, a bittersweet task that brought equal measures of tears and smiles. During this period, I received a surprising email from Alicia. After years of minimal contact, she was suddenly interested in reconnecting. Her message mentioned hearing about family matters that need discussing and suggested she visit soon. The timing struck me as suspicious. Acting on an instinct I couldn't fully articulate, I scheduled another meeting with Patrick. My grandfather mentioned the possibility of establishing a trust, I began. I'd like to understand what that would involve. Patrick explained various options, ultimately recommending an irrevocable trust with specific disbursement terms. It would protect the assets from creditors or claims, he noted. Once established, even you wouldn't be able to simply withdraw everything, which can actually be beneficial in certain situations. Like if someone were pressuring me for money, I asked directly. Patrick's expression confirmed my suspicions. Exactly like that. Before making my decision, I asked Patrick to conduct some discreet inquiries about my parents' current situation. The results were worse than I expected. My father had declared bankruptcy twice in the past decade. There were tax liens, defaulted loans, and even a pending lawsuit from investors in a failed business scheme. My mother had similar financial issues, along with multiple maxed-out credit cards. Between them, they had accumulated debts approaching $500,000. This information, coupled with their sudden interest in family matters and Alicia's unexpected outreach, made my decision clear. I established the irrevocable trust with Patrick's guidance, structuring it to provide me with reasonable income while protecting the principal from potential claims or my own potential mistakes. The process took just over a week to complete. 3 days after finalizing the trust paperwork, I received a call from an unknown number, Bridget's dad. "Your mom and I are in town. We thought it was time we all reconnected as a family." Just like that, after 20 years of absence, they were back in my life. The timing couldn't have been more suspicious, or more fortunate, given that the trust was now legally established. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock on Friday evening, just as they had proposed over the phone. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door to face the people who had abandoned me 2 decades earlier. My father Jackson had aged poorly, his once handsome face, now puffy and lined with the distinctive broken capillaries of a long-term drinker across his nose and cheeks. My mother Diana had maintained herself better. Her blonde hair clearly colored but stylishly cut her slim figure, showcased in an expensive-looking dress that somehow still managed to appear slightly inappropriate for a family. Dinner. Behind them stood my sister Alicia, now 30 years old, and almost unrecognizable from the protective 10-year-old who had once held my hand through our parents' chaotic episodes. Her expression was harder to read than our parents' transparently eager faces. "Bridget," my mother exclaimed, stepping forward to embrace me as if we'd seen each other last week rather than 20 years ago. She smelled of expensive perfume and mint gum masking something else. "Look at you, all grown up and so beautiful." My father hung back, attempting a casual stance that didn't quite hide his scrutiny of the house, visible behind me. "Hey, kiddo," he said, using a nickname he'd never actually called me as a child. "Been a long time." Alicia simply nodded. "Bridget." I invited them in, leading them to the formal dining room, where I'd set the table with grandmother's good china. It seemed appropriate somehow, as if her presence might fortify me through this surreal reunion. "What a lovely home," my mother gushed her eyes, cataloging every piece of furniture and art as we walked. Harold and Margaret always had impeccable taste. "Thank you," I replied simply. "They made it a wonderful place to grow up." A flicker of discomfort crossed my father's face at the pointed reminder of their absence during those years. He quickly masked it. "Well, we're just glad to finally be here. Water under the bridge, right, family is family." Dinner was an exercise in careful navigation. They asked superficial questions about my life, nodding with exaggerated interest at my responses. I provided bare minimum answers while observing their interactions. My mother dominated the conversation, while my father repeatedly steered topics toward financial matters with poor subtlety. "So I hear Harold did quite well with that hardware chain he mentioned, while cutting his roast beef." "Always the businessman, my father." "Yes," I answered neutrally. "He was very successful." "Must have left quite a nest egg," he continued, his casual tone, belied by the intensity in his eyes. "For the family, I mean." Alicia, who had been mostly silent, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, maybe dial it back a notch." He shot her an irritated glance but forced a laugh. "Just catching up, that's all. A father can be interested in his daughter's situation, can't he?" My mother quickly changed the subject, launching into a long explanation of their current business venture, something involving wellness products, with vague descriptions and grandiose profit projections. "We're just looking for some initial investors to get over the startup hump," she concluded, her smile bright and false. "It's going to be enormous." After dessert, my father suggested a tour of the house, his interest particularly focused on grandfather's study. I obliged, watching as he examined the room that had once been the center of my grandfather's business activities. his eyes lingering on the empty spaces where valuable items had once been displayed. "Where's Dad's coin collection?" he asked abruptly. He was always going on about those rare coins of his. "In secure storage," I replied truthfully, having moved them to a safe deposit box shortly after grandfather's passing. He nodded disappointment poorly concealed. Smart. Valuable things, those coins. When we returned to the living room, my mother launched into reminiscences that bore little resemblance to my actual childhood. According to her revised history, they had made the heart-wrenching sacrifice of leaving me with my grandparents to give me advantages they couldn't provide, always intending to return once they were established. "We always kept track of you, sweetheart," she insisted, reaching for my hand across the coffee table. I allowed the contact, but felt nothing beyond a clinical curiosity at her performance. "It broke our hearts to be apart from you, but we knew Harold and Margaret could give you the best of everything." "Yes," I said evenly. "They did." The evening continued in this vein, with increasing hints about their financial situation. My father mentioned his temporary cash flow issues that had unfortunately persisted longer than expected. My mother spoke about medical bills from unspecified procedures. Alicia remained mostly silent, watching the performance with an unreadable expression. As they prepared to leave, my mother delivered what was clearly their planned approach. "We've taken a suite at the Riverside Hotel, but we're thinking of staying in town more permanently. To be close to you, of course. We have so much time to make up for." "How long are you planning to stay?" I asked. "Well, that depends," my father interjected. "We're exploring some local business opportunities. Maybe you'd like to hear about them over lunch tomorrow, just you and me catching up on father-daughter time." I agreed to lunch more out of curiosity about their agenda than any desire for reconnection. After they left, I sat in grandmother's favorite armchair, processing the surreal evening. Their timing, their sudden interest, their thinly veiled financial inquiries, all confirmed my worst suspicions. The next morning, I called Patrick Sullivan and requested an urgent meeting before my lunch with my father. The attorney listened to my account of the previous evening with a troubled expression. "This confirms my concerns," he said after I finished. "Your father contacted our office last week, asking about the status of Harold's estate. We provided no information, of course, but the timing of their arrival immediately afterward speaks volumes." "Did he know about the trust?" I asked. "No, that information isn't public. The will is, however, which would show you as the sole beneficiary." At Patrick's suggestion, I hired a private investigator to look deeper into my parents' recent activities. The results came back the next day, revealing a pattern that chilled me. My parents had been monitoring obituary notices in several states, specifically targeting wealthy individuals without numerous heirs. There were records of them approaching distant relatives of these deceased individuals shortly after funerals. In 3 cases, there were settled lawsuits where they had claimed to represent family interests. Most disturbingly, the investigator found evidence that my sister Alicia had been working with them in this scheme for at least the past 2 years, despite her pretense of distance from them during our dinner. Armed with this knowledge, I maintained superficial contact with my family over the next week. I met my father for lunch, deflecting his increasingly direct questions about my inheritance. I accompanied my mother on a shopping trip where she repeatedly suggested items we could put on your card, darling. I even met Alicia for coffee watching, as she attempted to play the role of concerned sister while probing for financial details. Their frustration grew visibly as days passed without access to the wealth they clearly believed was available. My mother's cheerful facade began to crack, revealing glimpses of the unstable woman I remembered from childhood. My father's inquiries became less subtle, directly asking about bank accounts and investment portfolios. Alicia's approach was more sophisticated but equally transparent, suggesting joint ventures and family investment funds. The situation reached a breaking point when I returned home early from a meeting to find my parents' and grandfather's study rifling through his desk drawers. My mother was photographing documents with her phone, while my father pried at the locked bottom drawer with a letter opener. They froze when they saw me standing in the doorway, shock and guilt momentarily visible before my mother rallied with a trembling smile. "Bridget, we were just looking for that family photo album you mentioned, the one with your childhood pictures." The family album was in the living room bookcase, exactly where I'd shown them on their first visit. In that moment, the last lingering doubt about their intentions vanished. These people weren't family returning to reconnect. They were con artists, targeting what they believed was an easy mark, the daughter they'd abandoned, presumably desperate enough for family connection to be manipulated. They had dramatically underestimated what my grandparents had given me beyond material inheritance, strength, discernment, and a clear-eyed understanding of what real family meant. "That's not what you're looking for," I said calmly, stepping into the study. My father quickly straightened, sliding the letter opener onto the desk, as if he hadn't just been attempting to force a locked drawer. He began, but I cut him off. "I know exactly what you were doing." I crossed to the desk and closed the open drawer they had been searching. "Let's stop pretending. Why are you really here?" My mother's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The artificial warmth drained away, replaced by calculation, and then a different strategy, entirely wounded maternal affection. "How can you ask that?" Her voice quivered, perfectly eyes, welling with tears that looked almost genuine. "We're here because you're our daughter. We've missed so much of your life." 20 years, I stated flatly. "You missed 20 years by choice. And now you show up exactly 1 month after grandfather's obituary appeared in the national papers." My father abandoned pretense more quickly than my mother. "Look, Bridget, families are complicated. We made mistakes, sure. But blood is blood, and whatever issues we had with my parents shouldn't affect your relationship with us. You abandoned me when I was 7 years old. We left you with loving grandparents in a mansion," he countered an edge, entering his voice. "Some kids would call that winning the lottery." Alicia appeared in the doorway, clearly drawn by our raised voices. "What's happening?" "I caught them searching grandfather's desk," I explained, not taking my eyes off my parents. "Apparently, they're looking for financial information." Alicia hesitated, glancing between us, before attempting a reconciliatory tone. "Bridget, I'm sure they were just curious. This is all a big adjustment for everyone." "Stop it, Alicia," I said tiredly. "The investigator found your name on the lawsuits, too. I know you're working with them." Her expression hardened instantly. The mask of concerned sister discarded. "You hired an investigator to spy on your own family." "My own family raised me," I replied. "They taught me to recognize when I'm being conned." My father decided to change tactics, moving from conciliation to aggression. "Listen here. Whatever Harold left, a portion of it should rightfully come to me. I was his son. The son who never visited him during his final illness, who didn't attend his wife's funeral, who abandoned your own daughter on his doorstep." "Legal obligation works both ways," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Parents have obligations to their children, but adult children have obligations to aging parents too. That's the law." "That's not actually how inheritance law works," I corrected him, grateful for the legal courses I'd taken. "And even if it were, you terminated any moral claim when you disappeared from my life." My mother abandoned her tears, switching to cold anger. We're not leaving without what's ours. Harold's estate must be worth millions. You can't possibly need all of it. It's not about need, I said. It's about respecting my grandparents' wishes. They specifically didn't want you to have access to their money, because they poisoned you against us. My father's face flushed red. They turned you against your own parents. They never spoke ill of you, I countered truthfully. They didn't need to. Your absence spoke volumes. Alicia stepped further into the room, her calculating expression reminding me of our mother. Be reasonable, Bridget. We're talking about sharing, not taking everything. A family partnership. What exactly have you done to earn a partnership? I asked her directly. You chose to leave too, Alicia. I was 10, she exclaimed. What choice did I really have? The same choice you made as an adult to help them target grieving families. The investigator found everything, Alicia. The obituary monitoring the lawsuits, the settlements. How many vulnerable people have you approached after they lost someone? A telling silence followed this revelation. My father recovered first, his strategy shifting to intimidation. He stepped closer, using his height to loom over me. You listen to me. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you share what Harold left you. The hard way involves lawyers, court battles, and dragging your grandparents' names through very public mud. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I already knew. Harold wasn't always mentally sharp toward the end, was he? Grief after losing Margaret, his advanced age? It wouldn't be hard to suggest he wasn't competent when he made that will. Or that you, living in his house, might have exerted undue influence. The threat was clear, and the painful irony wasn't lost on me. The very people who had abandoned me were now threatening to claim I had manipulated the people who actually raised me. You'd perjure yourselves in court, I asked, though I already knew the answer. We wouldn't see it that way, my mother interjected smoothly. Memory is subjective, especially about family dynamics. If this goes to court, it could get very messy and expensive. Is that really how you want to honor Harold and Margaret, with a public legal battle? I looked at these three people, technically my closest blood relations, and felt nothing but a distant pity. They had no idea that their threats were empty, that the inheritance was already secured in a trust specifically designed to withstand such challenges. But more importantly, they had fundamentally misjudged me. They assumed that my desire for family connection would make me vulnerable to manipulation. They were wrong. I think it's time for you to leave, I said quietly. My father's expression darkened further. We're not going anywhere until we come to an understanding about our share. Your share is nothing, I stated firmly. That was grandfather's decision, not mine. You ungrateful little. He stepped toward me aggressively, hand raised. Don't I warned, stepping back and pulling out my phone? The security system is recording everything, and I won't hesitate to call the police. He hesitated, visibly calculating the potential consequences. My mother grabbed his arm, her eyes darting to the discreet security camera in the corner that they hadn't noticed before. Jackson, don't. It's not worth it. She turned to me, composure recovered, but with visible hatred now. This isn't over, Bridget. Family has rights. You forfeited those rights 20 years ago, I replied. Now please leave before I have you removed. You can't just throw us out, Alicia protested. We're staying at a hotel we can barely afford. That sounds like poor financial planning, I said, echoing one of grandfather's favorite phrases. But it's not my problem. When they continued to stand their ground, I made good on my threat, calling the security service that monitored the property. My parents and sister finally left, but not without parting threats. "We'll see you in court," my father snarled as they retreated to their rental car. "You think you've won, but this is just beginning." After they drove away, I sank onto the front steps of my grandparents' home, my home now, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The family I had once longed for had revealed themselves as predators rather than protectors. The closure I might have hoped for had instead opened a new wound. But beneath the pain was something unexpected relief. The confrontation had freed me from any lingering childhood fantasies about reconciliation. I could finally put to rest the little girl who had waited by the window for parents who never returned. As grandfather had written in his letter, my true inheritance wasn't just money, it was the strength and discernment to protect myself. Today I had honored that legacy. True to their threat, my parents filed a lawsuit contesting grandfather's will the following week. The legal documents alleged everything they had threatened during our confrontation, that grandfather had been mentally incompetent when making his will, and that I had exerted undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. Patrick Sullivan wasn't surprised when I brought him the court summons. "We anticipated this," he reminded me, reviewing the documents. "The trust structure will make their case extremely difficult, but we should prepare for an unpleasant process." He assembled a legal team specializing in estate litigation. The initial consultation was sobering. "They're asking for 50% of the estate," the lead attorney explained. "Their filing includes dozens of spurious claims, but the core argument is that your grandfather was not of sound mind when he excluded his only son from his will." "He was absolutely lucid," I affirmed. "We discussed his estate planning decisions explicitly." "We'll need to prove that," the attorney cautioned. "Medical records witness testimony documentation of his decision-making capacity. Meanwhile, they'll try to paint you as a manipulative influence who isolated him from his loving family." The irony was almost too much to bear. The discovery phase began requiring me to provide volumes of documentation about my grandparents, their finances, and my relationship with them. I spent days sorting through files, gathering evidence of grandfather's mental clarity and the consistent estrangement between him and my father. My parents' legal team demanded access to my grandparents' medical records, financial statements, and personal correspondence. Each request felt like an invasion, a posthumous violation of the people who had protected me. Patrick assured me we were providing only what was legally required, but the process still left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. The stress began affecting my sleep and appetite. Nightmares about my childhood returned, fragments of memories of waiting by windows, of promises broken, of Alicia's hand slipping from mine as she chose to leave. I would wake gasping, my heart racing, unable to fall back asleep. At Patrick's suggestion, I began seeing Dr. Lauren Chen, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our sessions became an anchor in the stormy sea of litigation. "What you're experiencing is a complex grief," Dr. Chen explained during one session. "You're mourning your grandparents while simultaneously confronting the renewed betrayal by your parents and sister. That's an extraordinary emotional burden." She helped me develop coping strategies for the stress, daily meditation, journaling, and setting boundaries around when I would engage with legal matters. "Don't check legal emails after 7 p.m., she advised. "Your brain needs time to rest from the conflict." Through therapy, I began to understand that my worth wasn't tied to my parents' approval or even their acknowledgement. Their behavior reflects their own character deficits, Dr. Chen pointed out, not your value as a person. Meanwhile, the legal process ground forward. Depositions were scheduled, starting with mine. For 6 grueling hours, I answered questions designed to make me appear calculating and manipulative. My parents' attorney tried repeatedly to trip me up about conversations with grandfather, suggesting I had planted ideas about disinheriting my father. "Isn't it true that you resented your father's claim to your grandparents' estate?" he asked with feigned sympathy. "I never thought of it as anyone's claim," I replied truthfully. "My grandparents earned their money and had the right to determine what happened to it." My parents' depositions came next. I sat silently as they constructed an elaborate fiction about attempts to reconnect that had been supposedly thwarted by my grandparents, and later by me. They described phone calls, never made visits, never attempted, and a deep desire for family reconciliation that had never existed. "We just wanted to be part of Bridgette's life again," my mother claimed tearfully. "But Harold and Margaret turned her against us, and now she's continuing their campaign to exclude us." Alicia's testimony was perhaps the most painful to hear. She described our childhood in terms I barely recognized, casting herself as a victim, forced to leave by our grandparents' preference for me. "They always favored Bridget," she claimed. "They made it clear there wasn't room for both of us." This was a complete fabrication. My grandparents had begged her to stay, even offering to convert the guest house into her own space if she wanted more independence. But Alicia's testimony revealed how thoroughly she had rewritten our history to justify her choices. The case took an unexpected turn when our legal team discovered journals in grandfather's study that I hadn't known existed. He had maintained a meticulous record of every attempted contact with my father over 20 years, including dates of unanswered calls, copies of returned letters, and notes about my father's rare communications, all of which involved requests for money. One entry from when I was 16 read, "Jackson called today. No questions about Bridgette's well-being or achievements. Requested $50, 000 for business opportunity. When refused, suggested I owed him for taking his daughter, as if Bridgette were property to be bartered rather than the child he abandoned. I fear for her should she ever fall under his influence again." These journals became central to our case, providing contemporaneous documentation of my father's absence and financial motivations. When combined with the private investigator's findings about my parents' pattern of targeting wealthy estates, they painted a damning picture of opportunism rather than parental concern. The decisive moment came during expert testimony. We presented 3 separate medical professionals who had evaluated grandfather in his final months, all confirming his mental competence. Our financial experts detailed the careful planning that had gone into the estate structure, demonstrating that the trust wasn't a hasty decision, but part of a long-term strategy. Most devastating to my parents' case was testimony from their former neighbors and my elementary school teachers who described the neglect I had experienced before going to live with my grandparents. These neutral third parties effectively countered the narrative of loving parents temporarily separated from their child. 4 months after it began, the case came before the judge for final arguments. My parents' attorney emphasized family obligation and natural succession, arguing that disinheriting a child violated social norms, if not legal requirements. Our attorney focused on grandfather's clear intentions, documented mental competence, and my parents' documented pattern of financial predation. The judge's ruling came 2 weeks later. She dismissed my parents' claims entirely, upholding grandfather's will and the subsequent trust arrangements as the valid expression of his wishes. In her written opinion, she specifically cited my parents' transparent financial motivations and absence during the decedent's life as factors in her decision. Outside the courthouse after the ruling, my father approached me one last time. His earlier aggression had given way to a different tactic: desperation. "Bridget, please," he said, his voice low and urgent. We're still your parents. We made mistakes, but everyone deserves a second chance. Just help us get back on our feet. A small portion of the inheritance, even just $1 million, would change our lives." I looked at him, really looked at the man who had contributed to my existence, but nothing to my character or happiness, and felt the last weight lift from my shoulders. I have no obligation to finance the lives of people who chose not to be part of mine, I said quietly. The court agreed. This is finished. As I walked away, I heard my mother call out, "Blood is thicker than water, Bridget." I didn't turn back, but I thought of something grandmother had once told me. The full saying is, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb." It means the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. My grandparents had chosen me, and I had chosen them back. That covenant was my true inheritance, far more valuable than any estate. The legal victory marked a turning point in my healing process. With the threat of losing my grandparents' legacy resolved, I could focus on honoring it properly. I established a scholarship foundation in their names, providing educational opportunities for children raised by grandparents or other relatives due to parental absence, children like me. I continued my therapy with Dr. Chen, working through the complex emotions the court case had stirred up. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me, when I experienced setbacks. Some days will be harder than others, but you're building resilience with each challenge. Gradually, I began reconnecting with the world beyond the lawsuit. I accepted the job offer I had deferred, starting my finance career while managing the portions of the estate not locked in the trust. I made new friends who knew me as Bridget the investment analyst, not Bridget the abandoned child or contested heiress. 1 year after grandfather's passing, I finally felt ready to truly live in the house we had shared, making small changes to make it mine, while preserving the essence of what my grandparents had created. I replanted grandmother's rose garden and converted grandfather's study into a home office where I could carry forward the financial acumen he had taught me. The legal battle had tested me, but it had also confirmed what my grandparents had always believed, that I possessed the strength to protect myself and the discernment to recognize true family connections. That knowledge was perhaps the most valuable part of my inheritance. Exactly 1 year after the court dismissed my parents' lawsuit, I stood on the steps of Westfield Community College to announce the first recipients of the Harold and Margaret Sullivan Memorial Scholarship. 5 students who had been raised by grandparents or other relatives would receive full tuition and support services to complete their degrees. My grandparents believed that education was the most powerful tool for transforming lives. I told the small gathering of press and community members. They transformed mine not just through financial support, but through the values they instilled and the love they provided when others wouldn't. This public commitment to my grandparents' legacy felt like the perfect counterpoint to the painful public scrutiny of the lawsuit. Instead of defending their memory in court, I was now honoring it through positive action. The scholarship was just the beginning of a larger foundation focused on supporting kinship care families and the children within them. In private, my healing journey continued with both progress and occasional setbacks. Dr. Chen helped me recognize that forgiveness didn't necessarily mean reconciliation. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, she explained during one of our now monthly sessions. It's about releasing the power that anger has over you. It doesn't require allowing harmful people back into your life. This distinction helped me process my feelings toward my parents and Alicia without the guilt I had sometimes felt for maintaining boundaries. I could wish them well, while recognizing that actual contact would likely lead to more manipulation attempts. I occasionally received updates about their lives through mutual acquaintances or news articles. My father and mother continued their pattern of questionable business ventures, moving from state to state as opportunities or legal pressures dictated. Alicia had apparently broken ties with them about 6 months after the failed lawsuit pursuing a more legitimate career path in real estate. 2 years after the court case, I received a letter from Alicia. Unlike our parents' communications, hers seemed genuinely reflective. She acknowledged the fabrications in her testimony and expressed regret for her role in the lawsuit. "I've spent years blaming everyone else for my choices," she wrote. "I'm trying to take responsibility now." I appreciated her honesty, but remained cautious. One apologetic letter couldn't erase decades of choices or the hurtful lies she had told under oath. I responded briefly, acknowledging her letter without making promises about future contact. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, could not be quickly rebuilt. Meanwhile, I focused on building a life that balanced honoring my grandparents' legacy with establishing my own identity. The investment skills grandfather had taught me served me well in my career, where I specialized in helping clients establish ethical, sustainable portfolios. I approached finance with his philosophy that money was a tool for security and helping others, not an end in itself. I renovated parts of the family home while preserving its essential character. Grandmother's rose garden flourished under my somewhat less expert care, and I learned to make her signature Sunday roast, though mine never quite matched her perfect version. These connections to their daily lives comforted me as much as the larger legacy projects. New relationships entered my life. Colleagues who became friends, neighbors who shared gardening tips, and eventually Thomas, a kind architectural historian I met while researching the history of my grandparents' house for preservation purposes. These connections formed slowly as I learned to balance caution with openness. "Your experiences made you careful about trust," Thomas observed after I finally shared my full family history with him. "But they didn't make you cold. That's remarkable." His observation helped me see what my grandparents had accomplished. Despite the abandonment I had experienced, they had raised me to believe in the possibility of genuine connection, to be discerning but not disconnected. 3 years after grandfather's passing, I expanded the foundation to include a mentoring program for teens in kinship care situations. I occasionally spoke to these groups, sharing my experiences in age-appropriate ways. Family isn't just about biology, I would tell them. It's about who shows up, who stays, who makes you feel safe and valued. Seeing these young people, many with stories far more difficult than mine, find strength and connection reminded me of my grandmother's wisdom. Pain that is transformed can become purpose. My grandparents had transformed their pain at their son's choices into purposeful love for me. Now I was transforming my experiences into support for others navigating similar paths. This continuing circle felt like the truest way to honor what they had given me. The $10 million estate had been the catalyst for my parents' return and the subsequent legal battle, but its true value lay in what it represented: my grandparents' lifetime of work, their careful planning, and their desire to provide security for the granddaughter they had raised. By using it thoughtfully, protecting some for future security, while deploying other portions to help others, I was fulfilling their intentions more completely than any court document could express. As I approach my 30th birthday, I recognize that my story continues to evolve. The abandoned 7-year-old, the beloved granddaughter, the contested heiress, the foundation director, these are all chapters in an ongoing narrative. What remains constant are the values my grandparents instilled: integrity, compassion, discernment, and the courage to protect what matters. The irrevocable trust that initially protected the estate from my parents' claims has become a symbol of something deeper: the boundary between allowing people into your heart and allowing them to exploit your vulnerability. I've learned that these boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential to meaningful connection. If you've ever had to protect yourself from family who should have protected you, know that you're not alone. Setting boundaries isn't about revenge or bitterness. It's about creating space for genuine relationships to flourish. The family we're born into may shape our beginnings, but the family we choose and who chooses us shapes our character and future. Has someone in your life stepped up when others stepped away? I'd love to hear about the people who became your true family. Leave a comment below, like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult circumstances, and share with someone who might need to hear that family is about love, not just blood. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by those who left, but by the courage it takes to remain true to yourself despite that leaving.